Ewan Goddard. And Ewan is a senior operations leader with over 10 years of experience driving operational excellence in the finance industry. He's preceded by 7 years leading manufacturing operations, lean management consulting, and executive coaching. So it's very unique when you see someone who has been in the boot camps of manufacturing, applying methods and techniques on a very tough environment, and then able to take that to transactional processes in the financial industry. I always find that those leaders and practitioners are the most complete because they have seen it all. So Ewan, I really look forward to your presentation and your insights. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jose. Looking forward to it. Excited to share a little bit about that. I'm sure I'm definitely not what I would call complete and on a continuous learning journey myself. So hopefully enough of that learning's taken place that I can provide some insight and some helpful information today. Okay, I think I have my screen all shared and ready to go. So again, thank you, Jose, for the warm introduction. We're obviously in a pretty unprecedented time, so I thought it might be a helpful topic to really elaborate on, the implications of COVID-19 on our work environments, on how we engage with each other. The impact on our customers and how they engage with our products and our services, and talk about it more on a macro level to start with, and then really drill into some of the examples of how we're dealing with those transitions at Voya. So as you'll see from the agenda, we're really looking at change mechanisms. What's changed about that in the last 6 months as we're faced with the pandemic and the implications of that. How are our existing management systems, processes, products, and people set up for this new environment? And then trying to sort of navigate the landscape of, yes, there are changes, but some of them may not be around forever. And which ones do you pick for more elaborate solutions, and which ones do you more put in the quick fix bucket to help for a short-term need? And I think some of the examples of what we're doing at Voya might be helpful, but I'd be really interested to hear in the Q&A section about how other companies are facing some of this, because we're all in the same boat. We're all in this together, and going through very similar experiences at each of our companies. So I think we also get hung up on change in general, and I do want to sort of share this concept of the pace of change increasing. I think in the 60s and 70s, when books were getting mass produced all of a sudden, that was the technology of the day that was going to break the human adaptability spirit and create mass mayhem across the globe. We know that didn't happen. But this concept of change outpacing our ability to cope with it and adapt to it isn't new. It hasn't come true yet, thankfully. And I think it does underestimate our ability and capacity for change. And I think if we go in with that mindset, we can address things in a little more of an empowering manner than saying things are changing at a pace that we can't cope with, and it starts to feel very overwhelming. So I think we need a little bit of a paradigm shift, that we're not ready for change, and change is hard, to we're doing lots of things to be ready for change. It's not going away. We know that, and the more that we can lean into that versus be fearful of that, I think that the better off we'll be. Inherent in feeling more comfortable with change is creating an environment where you can learn fast. And I see a lot of organizations say, yeah, test and learn, fail fast, but when a failure occurs, it's really frowned upon. So I think there are ways that we can make change hard and make change fearful, and there are ways that we as leaders and the things that we build can make change certainly easier and more rapid as a result. The other thing is obviously sacred cows. I think is a bit of an interesting one. I know in banking, my days in banking, there was a lot of legacy systems that couldn't be touched for certain reasons. But certainly once we scratched the surface, there were a lot of aspects to those legacy systems that we could address, versus saying, no, this whole system needs to stay because of all of these legacy features that we've built. So don't get hung up on the investment you put into something in terms of wanting to keep it is ultimately another way to make the change curve a little less daunting. This is a version of that same concept, but I want to put it in the context of our business and maybe our industry as well. So when you come up with a new product or a new continuous improvement program or anything really, on that horizontal line, you have a launch date, and hopefully the value of whatever you've just built and launched is greater than the need or the value that our customers expect. We do make sort of stable improvements over time, but we get in this cycle of not improving the things that we've built because they're slow and cumbersome, to a point at which it gets sort of a little stale. It gets past its use by date. And you could put any number of things on that horizontal line. I like to use it for individuals. So when you're first hired, the value you bring, the capabilities you bring to an organization is far greater than the organization needs. So you're filling that gap, you're providing value. If you don't develop yourself, if you don't grow, build new leadership capabilities, then you yourself can become past your use by date, so to speak. So you can really use this to sort of think about the evolution of change to sort of stay ahead and continually add value. So we think about products, a really good one in a big part of our business in insurance. You think about life insurance. They're a very traditional, stagnant, commoditized product where hasn't had a lot of innovation or creativity for quite some time. And we've seen a lot of businesses exiting the life business as a result because the customers aren't receiving the value anymore. So the businesses aren't receiving the value for those products as a result. So I think we do want to think about all of these things when we're designing new products. How are we getting ahead of the curve and to understand what our customers' needs are and getting them out there ahead of the curve so that we are delivering value and as a result achieving profitability? And then how do we keep it ahead of that is the biggest challenge I think we face. Customer data programs are very important in this facet. So you create a new customer survey and a voice of the customer program or a net promoter score scenario, and in an environment like COVID, where you need real-time specific data and feedback to understand what the needs of our customers are and how they're changing, it really sort of shines a light on some of the challenges of the things that were built, and I think that's an important feature. If we go back to the no sacred cows, I think sometimes there's a little bit of this is the way we've always gathered feedback from our customers, and it's worked. But I think in some of these environments where we're in unprecedented times, some of these things that were built are no longer as effective as they once were. I'm not saying you throw them all out, but certainly the value that they were providing and are providing in their current environment is less than what it was. And the management system itself. So we all have the Toyota production house and all of the behaviors and principles and tools and practices that get our results. So whether that's our hiring systems, our improvement systems, whatever it may be, the systems that we use to manage our business, we often launch those with big corporate fanfare and great investment, and I think once we roll those out across an entire enterprise, they by the time you get to the end, they start to become past the use by date because the program is static. And I think again in a COVID environment, it just accelerates that gap that we're seeing. And then obviously ways of working. I think you know, we had a period there where everybody's trying to make the Google kind of workplace, whereas open spaces and collaboration. And obviously that's been a huge transition with COVID-19, where we can't physically gather and collaborate and ideate, and certainly that became very quickly past its use by date in a lot of instances, and companies have invested a lot of money in that. And so it's an interesting one to figure out how we can create an environment for working and in problem solving and improvement in this new environment with an inability for direct physical interactivity. And I think we're getting better at it, but when you have the option of the physical, we're always going to use it, right? Because it is, there are other elements that you lose in a virtual environment, but we do have to now think about exclusively virtual, which is a challenge for me right here presenting to you. I've done lots of conferences and speaking, but all in person, and I can see how you're reacting and responding to the things that I'm saying. So if we have that option, we will always lean on it, and we will sort of invest and develop the virtual environment. Obviously now we're in a situation where that's past its use by date. We really need to rethink and invest in our virtual environment so that we can nurture those collaborations and environments that were so successful in the past. So there are a number of means to go about staying ahead of the curve, and I think if you talk about transformation, sometimes they're such large-scale events that by the time they are designed, funded, built, and launched, they are almost getting close to that best before or use by date already. So when we are doing disruptive events like transformation programs, we want to have a bit more intent with our disruption. With that pace of change on the previous slide ever increasing, we want to make sure that if we're building a big program of transformation, that we are coming to the very left, coming in from the very left, as far left of this this graph as possible. The closer we are to the midpoint, or even beyond it sometimes, I think we've all experienced programs that feel a little obsolete almost before they've begun. So obviously, if we're going to go through the big bang, we do want to sort of get further and further ahead of the game, and we'll talk a little bit later about our ability to be more predictive and proactive in our ability to come up with the next big bang. Similarly, you want to couple that with an everyday improvement mindset. I think when you launch a new product, or you build a new management system, or you roll out a new customer engagement program, or whatever it might be, yeah, you do some tweaks, you get some feedback, and yeah, you make some improvements, but it's kind of a one and done. That project was funded in this way, and there's no money left in the bucket for improvements. And so I think what we need to start doing is keeping money in project buckets for sustainability and continuous improvement for all of these things, such that we don't have to do the big bang as much as we often do. And we see that with a lot of our legacy technologies and what have you, that the funding to keep the lights on is only just enough, and there's not enough funding to have the big or the continual improvement and iterative improvement for some of those legacy systems. So then you get stuck in an environment where you have to create a big program and a large spend and a disruptive transformational event to be able to stay ahead of the curve and ensure that your systems are really driving the value before they're past their use-by date. Okay, so we've talked about the pace of change, and we've talked about how when we launch new things and create new things that we need to create improvement and both transformational and iterative structures to make sure that those things that we built add value for much longer than they currently are. And again, the COVID environment is absolutely shrinking that timeline. So we need to be able to really augment our focus on improvement and growth with these things. Otherwise, we'll be rebuilding a lot of things as the change overcomes them. But when we're talking about change, we absolutely need to think about humans and our we talked about our ability to change is greater than what I think we give it credit for. But there are some certain conditions that we certainly need to understand, and I've stolen with pride from a gentleman called Paul Hegan on this one, because I think he captures it in the way that I've talked about it for many years, in the sense of one of the conditions that is the human condition is that there needs to be a level of pain in the current situation for us to be able to even want to consider moving to a new situation. So we have to be super unhappy, basically, with where we are today, and that makes logical sense when you think about nobody gets out of bed each day and goes, things are going really great. I think I might flip them on their head, so to speak. So I think it makes sense intuitively. It sounds a bit odd when you say that we have to be profoundly unhappy, but I think it's definitely an environment that creates an impetus for change, and it's often not going to work for me, the consultant, or me, the leader, to tell you we need a change. It's got to come from ourselves to understand what we don't like about the current situation and where we're going in the future. Which leads me to my next condition for recipe for change. I think we need a couple of teaspoons of this, if we need maybe a couple of tablespoons of the previous one, if we want to beat the recipe analogy to death. But basically, we need a clear vision of that future to be able to desire change, to be able to just go from, okay, I guess we have to no, this is going to be great. And that's really difficult. I mean, I know within my company, we've revisited our purpose through COVID-19. We've revisited our vision and mission for the company, and then obviously that cascades down throughout the organization. Because what we had for a vision really got disrupted, and we'll talk a little bit down the track about some of the ways that happen. But absolutely, you want to think about having a clear vision at all times, and you want to think about disruptions like COVID-19 and a global pandemic, and certainly if that creates any things that you need to adjust with your vision. Because if that's not there, if there's not a clear picture of the future and an anticipation and excitement about what that could bring, you're gonna lose people along the way, obviously. And this is fairly generic change management, sort of 101 stuff, but I think as you apply it to a COVID-19 sort of scenario, I think it starts to resonate a little more strongly than maybe it has in the past. And I think, even if you are doing transformational change, like we talked about on the previous slide, even if you're doing the big change, I think in this environment, we really need to still break it down into small steps. It makes it less daunting. When you talk about a transformation coming down the line, you know that there's months and months and months of heavy lifting and adaptation and training and all of those things. So I think breaking it down into small steps and having more incremental improvement, milestones that are clear along the way and shorter than what they probably normally would have been maybe 12 months ago, will help us sort of stay on the journey for longer. And certainly it's working for us to really break down these big events into much smaller chunks and much more tactical improvements, while still showing that vision for the future and how it connects, but making sure that we're just focused on the next and the next and the next, kind of like in the 2-week sprint of an agile methodology. So we talked a lot about change on a systemic level, on a global level, and on a human level. So I want to talk a little bit about our management system at Voya, and just in general. I think we all have management systems, as I mentioned previously, and all of them have been built for a specific purpose. Their tools are there to bring the principles to life, to get the outcomes that we seek and help us move us closer to our vision. But I think we've designed those for a specific environment, and then a lot of those things certainly have shifted in the last 6 months. And we do need to rethink about our system. Is it still driving the same outcomes at the same level as they were before? And if they are not, then what do you need to do differently in the way that you run your business to continue getting results in this new environment? So certainly customers are at the top of everything that we think about at Voya. And I think, you know, if you think about anything in the lean management system kind of context, customer value is at the core of everything. So, you know, when we're a lot of our business at Voya is done through the workplace, so employee benefits and retirement plans and those sorts of things. So when you think about an environment like COVID-19, where you know, mass furloughs have taken place across entire industries, and we work across every industry, so we see the gamut of no impact to complete impact. So we have to think about how our products are serving these people in these environments. So where we traditionally work through the workplace, now we're working direct with a lot of individuals. So we have to think about how our value stream maps reflect what our customers value and need right now and how that's changed. We have to absolutely think about whether that change is a 6-month thing, a 12-month thing, and maybe if there is an end to COVID-19, will it still be a requirement, and design accordingly. And then waste elimination is obviously the things that don't add value. So if value is changing, then we need to change our lens for waste as well. And there's certainly been a number of ways that we've gone about that. And we'll talk a little bit about our VSE programs and how we're shifting our investment there to start to think about that a little more proactively. Investing in CX programs has certainly helped us think more holistically about value streams and how we deliver value throughout our processes, and how we adapt value in changing circumstances like COVID-19. I mean, virtual problem solving, I already discussed a little bit around, you know, how do we interact and engage and collaborate in a virtual environment? And I think PDCA or RCPS is a little shout out to our McKinsey-led deployment of continuous improvement. But that problem-solving format is definitely always been designed for standing around and building on each other's ideas, iterating, lots of body language, lots of engagement, lots of hands-on tactile stuff. More so in my manufacturing days, obviously. I think in the finance industry, we're definitely blessed with a lot of digital information, so we can do a lot of our analysis and problem solving in a virtual environment much more effectively, obviously. But we do need to think about these things. I mean, design thinking is one of the most sort of collaborative and connected and human engagement experiences from a problem-solving perspective, and that's going to really struggle, and we have had difficulty ourselves in adapting that one to a virtual environment. Mistake proofing, again, is probably a lot easier in finance versus manufacturing, but mistake proofing it is often best suited to a physical environment as well. So we've had to rethink a lot of the way we go about it. We've had to sort of augment our virtual conferencing capabilities, adding in Zoom, as I'm sure we all have, but also all of the engagement capabilities, training along with that, et cetera, et cetera. But we do need to think about the structures for problem solving that worked before and what's changed and what's going to be effective going forward. And I've talked a little bit about the VOC. Again, I'll get into this in a little bit more detail as we get into it. But basically, are our systems appropriate? And I think our answer internally was no after addressing it, because we had a scenario where we were listening to our customers via complaints about, this new environment from COVID-19 isn't helping me, your product isn't helping me in the way it needs to. By the time we identified that and then built a solution, we'd missed the market essentially, or at least the first wave. And so I think you can start to see how your VOC systems are effective or not as this COVID-19 starts to change customer value and the propositions that we deliver. You really need to drive the way you listen to your customers in a different way to be able to stay ahead of and identify new opportunities and issues as well. And then the people themselves. So we talked about the human need for change and the recipe for success there. We talked a lot about the environment and our collaboration needs. Education is another interesting one. We obviously like to attend a lot of conferences, and after a few months, we've all adapted to virtual conferences, as you're all here today, displaying your adaptation skills. But internal training programs, we've invested heavily in, and we've struggled to reimagine those in a virtual environment. And I think it's taken a lot of businesses, including ours, several months to really get those programs back up in a virtual environment, and in a way that adds the same value as they did before. And when you lose a few months of training, you really start to see the trickle-down effect in quality and productivity as we sort of try to close that gap of a few months of adjustment that it took us to get there. So I've talked a lot about listening to our customers, and I think this is more getting into the Boyer experience, but I'm guessing and hoping it probably resonates across the community that listening into this webinar here today. But we really obviously invested a great deal in the left side of the screen on the React side. And obviously there are regulatory reasons why you invest heavily in managing complaints and driving that. But if that becomes a core channel for you to listen to your customers, then it's kind of too late in a lot of regards. You've already let that issue or poor quality or problem slip through to the customer. By that stage, you've already probably lost that customer. You've potentially lost more through word of mouth and reputation damage. And it's just not going to provide you the data to improve in a proactive way that's going to help you grow your customer base in any way. So yes, we do need to manage complaints, and we do need to provide empathy and support and service to our customers where it hasn't gone well. I don't think there's any company that has no complaints, but we do want to not rely on it as our channel for the voice of our customers. I think similarly, feedback surveys, I think there's such an inundation of surveys that typically the only people that are emoted enough to want to respond to a survey and provide feedback are more in the complaints bucket than anything else. It's kind of rare that you'll hear a really positive story. Although I will say in a lot of our situations in Voya where we pay the claims promptly or what have you, we do get a lot of positive feedback. But I think in general, feedback and surveys are after the fact, after the product's been delivered, after the survey's been delivered, and often a little too late in the mix for driving improvement, product innovation, or whatever it might be. Voice of the customer, voice of the industry, voice of the partner. So how are your listening posts across those different channels? Are they effective? Do they go deep enough? Are they broad enough in terms of the breadth of voices within those segments to really get a good feel for trends and issues with customers in the industry as a whole, and how we're interacting with our partners? We've invested pretty heavily there, and we feel pretty good about that one. But again, it's probably not enough on the anticipate side for us to really have an effective conversation about using that information to drive product innovation or improvement to stay ahead of that customer value schematic that I showed a little earlier. What we are starting to invest in and seeing great results in is customer experience, or CX. Journey maps is something that we started actually a couple of years ago, and we're starting to see good results in terms of, when we're starting to pull the data and analyze a marketplace or a product and start to map an ideal state and listen and gather feedback from our customers on design versus failure. It starts to influence a vision for the customer experience that influences everything that we do. And it's starting to help us build things that are anticipating needs versus responding or reacting to needs, which is helping us be first to market. It's helping us solve problems, real problems that people are facing, especially through a COVID-19 environment. And as I mentioned before, we had some hits and misses in responding to COVID-19, and I think we probably hit more than we've missed based on our investment in the customer experience work. Having user sessions is going to be critical. Where we've dabbled and are probably increasingly looking to sort of create more of the big idea stuff is in the incubator space, or hackathons and design thinking. And I think they're still immature processes in the sense where it's going to take a long time to get a hackathon together, get the ideas, groomed into a sort of finalist list, and then re-hackathoned, and then finalized, and then launched, and then delivered. That timeline is probably still too long in a COVID-19 environment, but also I think just in general, a pace of change environment. So we see value in it, and we've gotten good results from it, but we do need to make it faster to make it more effective. And I think continuing investments in those right side of the ledger opportunities will absolutely give us the kind of value and staying ahead of the curve as we anticipate. So on to my final slide, and I know I've only got a minute here to go, but I don't want to spend the last slide on a downer, but I think there are many barriers to sort of speed of change and speed of improvement and speed of innovation. And I'm not saying that we want to sort of go around or ignore those. They're all there for a good reason. but I think we've generated a lot of success in thinking about these things as more of an FMEA, or failure modes effects analysis opportunity. So yes, these are barriers that exist and are real in organizations across the world, but ignoring them isn't going to help. It's going to make those barriers bigger, and it's going to make those barriers slow things down significantly, such that you're going to miss the mark with responding to COVID-19 type product responses and those sorts of things. So just stepping through that. So from a cultural lens, you know, are we ready for change? We talked about that right out of the gates. Does your organization trust you when change hits from a cultural perspective? So do we sort of eye change with an air of mistrust or fear? Have we failed in the past and been scolded for it? And that level of trust in the culture is gonna need to be understood, and that barrier needs to be understood. If it exists, you're gonna need to mitigate in some way. Whether that's a trust building program like we've done at Voya. We invested heavily in literally building trust in formulated sessions, and that's been really successful for us in terms of driving improvement and having people understand why the improvement's taking place and trust that that's a good thing. From a process perspective, you know, we have to have risk functions, we have to have compliance and regulations, and there has to be a healthy tension between a risk function and, say, a product function, because you know, product wants to absorb all the risk, and compliance wants to absorb none of it. So having that healthy tension and coming somewhere in the middle is important, but you need to understand the implications of all of those things. And there are ways that you can make the risk smaller by doing the same thing. So we've done things like quarantine the risk into a small subset, have smaller bets in terms of do tests and pilots versus full-scale rollouts. Having an innovation fund that has a slightly reduced risk or a slightly greater appetite for risk because it's cordoned off or not part of the whole. And I think there've been good practices that have helped us speed through some of those, what can sometimes be very complicated processes. And from a process lens, standard work or current best method, I think we build our standards and then they sit gathering dust forevermore. We do want to make sure that we're driving a current best method kind of mindset in terms of our process. So yes, it's just the current best way we do something, but we're always looking for better ways versus this is the standard and we do it this way forevermore. And technology. In banking, in my time in Australia, it was often cheaper to build an entirely new business with a new banking platform from scratch than it was to rebuild your legacy platform. So I think understanding those barriers, and I talked a little bit about it previously in the sense of, yeah, the barrier is the legacy system is difficult to enhance or improve, but there's got to be parts within that we can, and we can make steps towards a better situation there. And I think that's something to think about as well. So obviously we want to bring these things together, and when we understand the barriers that exist within these three areas, I think we can really hit that sweet spot and really get speedy in terms of how we improve and innovate and bring things to market and deliver value to our customers at a time of need, which is right now. So that's the final piece. I think I'll hand it back to Jose to facilitate the Q&A.
Terrific, Ewan. Thank you so much for sharing the journey at Voya Financial with us and how the organization is responding to this time with the pandemic. It's being a common theme with all the banks and financial institutions and the leadership we have spent this week with, talking here, that if anything, that the pandemic has accelerated the pace of innovation. It has accelerated digital transformation, and as one of the quotes that we had early on is that there was one institution that has been on this journey for the last 5 years, and because of enterprise risk management related concerns, they had not fully deployed the digital workplace. And then in 5 days, they went full on because they didn't have an option. They had to do it. And then all the legal and safety and security concerns were lower in the priority list. So the question is, are you? I believe you're experiencing something similar at Voya Financial, and I'm just curious about what are some of the top two or so leading changes that you have seen happen during this time to adapt to this new reality, to adapt to the pandemic social distancing setup.
Yeah, I think one of the ones you just mentioned was probably a big one for us. Like, we were even moving away from a virtual environment for working and saying, if you're in a proximity, we want you in the office because we want a problem-solving culture where we collaborate, and that sort of Google Workspace kind of deal. So we invested heavily in our workplaces. We wanted people to leverage those spaces, and we wanted to create this great environment at the office. And we were actually going in the other direction that most companies were, but and in a similar situation, within a month, our entire workforce was virtual. So yeah, that was definitely a huge one. I think another one. What would be another good one to share here? Well, I guess if we think about that compliance and procurement process as you start to think about building something new, I mentioned earlier that we had a bit of a mess in terms of, we tried to launch a new product to respond to the needs of our customers, which had really pivoted greatly through the COVID-19 scenario. And by the time we got it through compliance and contracting and this, that, and the other, we'd missed the mark by a number of weeks. And customers had gone and solved their problem in another way. And so we started to deep dive into that, and we started to realize that there was some components that were way too slow to respond to this environment. And probably in hindsight, it's just unearthed what was always too slow, but it was kind of on the brink, and now COVID-19's kind of put it over the edge. So we start to sort of really challenge, yes, this is a compliance need, but how can we interpret that in a different way? Is it, or how can we execute that in a different way? And I think working with companies that do sort of fintech companies that help you with regulatory injections and those sorts of things are certainly helpful. We engage in those, and I think building the relationship between the procurement risk compliance side of the shop and the product business line kind of the shop has been a really big change that it was probably not as healthy as it needed to be fast and effective. And from a relationship perspective, that was a big shift.
And Ewan, tell us a little bit about. It looks like the company was engaging on a journey of enhancing its culture, and you talk about the motivation, the ability to do change, and curious about. You talked about the collaboration that was happening, even on bringing people to the office so that they can collaborate more effectively. All a great recipe for accelerating innovation and excellence. My question is, how have you adapted now to keep that momentum going in this new setting, in the way that we are distanced, that we're communicating from means like the ones we're using today? How have you adapted to that new reality to not lose momentum and keeping that change in your culture going in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we looked around, we realized we actually had a lot more tools available to us that weren't being utilized that were super effective. Whether it's SharePoint collaboration tools and wikis and web spaces, internal chat, whether it's the whiteboard features and the polling features on some of the web conferencing software, whether all of these things we actually had, but we just weren't utilizing. And I think it definitely took a period of education and adaptation. But the beauty of it was that we didn't have to go and purchase a bunch of new software or build a new system to handle all these things. We had it all. We just weren't really leveraging it to its fullest potential, which we've gone about making sure that now everyone understands the capabilities that we have at our disposal, and the benefits of using them and how to use them and those sorts of things. And we're really starting to see a new way of collaborating emerging from that. That's really healthy. And you know, when you get into traditional formats, you get traditional outcomes, and I think you sort of break the mold and you get kind of outcomes that you wouldn't have anticipated as we get into it. So that's been really great.
Very good. Time for one more quick question just to wrap up here at the end of the day. One common theme, recurring theme that we have observed as well is that organizations are saying that they actually are able to accelerate innovation right now because they have the biggest constraint in normal times is actually the availability of the right people to accelerate innovation. And in most organizations right now, there is some of those right people have a little bit more time now. The perception is that way anyway than they did before. Curious if you have experienced that, if having the right leaders, for collaborative leaders in the organization, is a main constraint for accelerating innovation for you, and if you have noticed that in this constant setting, in this current setting, if you have if those people have a little bit more availability and therefore they can push some of these initiatives forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us at Voya, that's not been a huge issue in terms of leader availability in particular. But you know, when you get 2 hours back of commuting every day, yeah, you're going to have an opportunity to engage a lot more people a lot more quickly. There's more white spots on the calendars for everybody than there ever has been before. So I would imagine it has created a positive impact for us, and I can say that for certain. Yeah, but we were blessed with a leadership group that's really committed to sort of going to the source and being being down there where the work is done and connecting with our people on a regular basis, and that's been a sort of a core tenet of our continuous improvement program, that we're coaching and learning by seeing and those sorts of things. So it's not a huge shift for us, but I'm absolutely certain that the availability piece has increased, and that certainly greases the wheels of change and improvement. So.
And it speaks volumes to have a leader of excellence and innovation like you to take the time and share these lessons with the world. On behalf of the entire audience, the global audience that's with us today, thank you so much for sharing this very insightful presentation and being with us today.
Pleasure, Jose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes day 2 of Financial Services Live. Tomorrow we have, let's take a look at who we're gonna have tomorrow. Another great lineup of thought leaders in banking, in financial services globally. We're gonna, early on in the morning, we're gonna have Dr. Arthur Preuss, who is the senior leader for digital transformation at HSBC, and he is gonna talk to us about the customer-driven digital transformation that HSBC is undergoing right now. After that, we have Swiss Re, the head of operational excellence for Swiss Re, is going to talk to us about building a client-centric financial organization, and we'll specifically share Swiss Re case studies and lessons learned, and what they're doing there on that journey to build a client-centric financial organization that's accelerating as a result of the global pandemic. And we're gonna wrap up tomorrow with a real treat. We have Peter Layton, who is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of RE Royalties, talking about fintech. He's going to talk about the financing of the green economy as well, and the impact it's having on climate change and investments in that area. So a very diverse global group of thought leaders who are going to be sharing their experiences and know-how with us. Excited about that. Looking forward to meeting you again tomorrow here and sharing all these lessons. Again, you can go onto LinkedIn and leave comments there, leave questions there. Several of our speakers will log back on later on today, and we'll look at questions and comments, and we'll comment back. Thank you again for joining us on Financial Services Live, and we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow. Take care.